A young boy looks up, mouth agape, and sees a towering structure. Standing before it is a man wearing an eccentric accessory. The man smiles at the boy, until a sudden blast echoes across the outskirts of a city and a thick layer of smoke begins to rise. At that moment, the boy jolts awake from the dream, deep in thought about who that man could be. He's had the same vision again. His friend asks what's wrong, but Tito insists everything is fine, pulling the covers over his head as the other boy keeps pressing. Just then, a woman barges into the dorm to wake everyone up. She says they all need to gather before the bell stops ringing, or else they'll be held back an entire year. Naturally, the kids bolt out of bed and start running. Tato's friend hurries him along, but Tato's already dressed, calm and collected. He looks over and tells Mikaj, "Time to go." Soon after, they join the rest of Class 315 of the Barsberg Imperial Military Academy, an elite unit responsible for defending the Hoburg Fortress. The commanding officer steps forward and calls up the class speaker, Shuri Oak. But before Oak takes the stage, another officer remarks that President Moroku's graduating class seems quite talented, or so he's heard. Moroku responds coolly. Out of the 500 students graduating, only 20 will pass the exam and become beglighters. That's when the real challenge begins for those who remain. Later on, during class, the president informs the students that high-ranking officials will be attending tomorrow's graduation exam, so everyone had better bring their A-game. Some students whisper that Shuri Oak is sure to be recruited straight into the army, especially since he comes from an influential family. President Moroku then makes a slightly disappointed comment. Tato Klein has, for some reason, decided to skip all practical combat lessons. Tato calmly reminds him he was excused from all practical courses. Shuri takes the opportunity to throw shade, saying Moroku's favorite is getting special treatment as always. In response, Mikaj floats a racy magazine straight into Shuri's hands and publicly calls him out for bringing adult content into the classroom. Later, in another area of that hyper-developed region, Mikaj complains that Tato has been spaced out all day. He figures it's probably the pressure from the upcoming exams. As they talk, a massive airship passes overhead, and Mikaj is blown away by the sight. He says that once they pass the test, they'll finally board the Hoburg Fortress, and when that day comes, he'll protect his family. But the topic hits a nerve with Tato. He can't even remember his own family. Instead, he keeps having that strange dream over and over. Maybe, just maybe, it's actually a memory from a forgotten past. That evening, the two practice for the exam. As they spar, Tato hears the voice of an old mentor in his head, warning him, "Never show mercy. Mercy is weakness." After dodging an attack, Tito slips behind his opponent and wins the match. Mikaj, impressed, says Tito is bound to stand out the moment he joins the army. He's just that special. When it's time to sleep, Mikaj confides in Tito. Chances are, they'll end up in different units after the test, so he makes Tato promise they'll keep in touch no matter what. Tato reflects on his past. He was once a battle esclavo, trained to fight until death. As far as he knows, he was stationed at Moroku's fortress and never knew what it meant to have a family. But Mikaj's friendship must be the closest thing to it. Hearing that for the first time, Mikaj gets emotional and proposes a pact of brotherhood between them, a vow that they'll never abandon each other, and if it comes down to it, they'll die together. The next morning, the candidates are sent to separate rooms, divided into groups for the exam. Shuri Oak immediately picks a fight with Tato, shocked to be placed in the same group as a mere esclavo. He scoffs that being Moroku's favorite won't help once the test begins. Mikaj, half asleep, mutters that Shuri is just a spoiled brat writing on his daddy's name. Regardless, the rivals now have to team up for the real exam, defeating a massive criminal inside the combat arena. The instructors warn them that the only real path to success is through teamwork, something that clearly won't come easy. The fight begins. Shuri is fired up, desperate to prove to Tato that he's the top dog, but the monster turns out to be unstoppable. Meanwhile, Chief Ayanami arrives to observe the students' progress and finds Shuri banging on the glass, trying to flee the arena. Another high-ranking officer comments dryly that being born into the Oak family doesn't guarantee success in a test like this. The criminal strikes directly at Shuri, but he's saved by the one person he can't stand, Tato. Mikaj jumps in, and together they bring the beast down. Tato remembers the old warning, never show mercy. Mercy is weakness. And yet, he spares the criminal's life. That's when Ayanami steps in and ends it, killing the prisoner without hesitation. After the test, only 19 candidates make the cut. including Tato and Mikaj. They talk about the commander who used his Xiphon to finish off the criminal and how he's infamous for being ruthless. Still, the two friends reaffirm their bond to protect one another, no matter what, and to stick together till the end. That night, Tato dreams again. But this time, the man in his vision promises, "One day, I'll come back for you." When morning comes, Tato walks through the academy's hallway until he hears a familiar sound. It's the jingle of the strange accessory worn by the man in his dream. It draws him toward a room where high-ranking military officers are searching for a relic lost during the war with the Kingdom of Rags, a gemstone once embedded in the royal necklace, known as the Eye of Mikhail. Suddenly, Tato is pulled back into the same dream. But this time, the man wearing the Eye of Mikhail is attacked and killed by the Barsberg Imperial Academy. That man was his father, and his killer was Ayanami. In a burst of rage, Tato lunges at the commander, but is quickly subdued by one of his men. Upon learning the boy was once a slave of Rags, Ayanami orders him to be interrogated. He wants to rip out any remaining knowledge Tato may have about the gemstone they've been searching for, one that vanished along with his homeland. Without delay, the officers storm into Tato Klein's locker and gather his belongings. Mikaj, confused, asks what's going on, and is told it's the end of the line for the kid after he attacked Ayanami. Worried his friend might be in serious trouble, Mikaja sneaks out in the middle of the night to avoid being seen and finds Tato locked up in one of the prison cells. For some strange reason, the door is wide open, and every single guard is dead. Without hesitation, Mikaj helps Tato reach a Hawksile he used to pilot, hoping they can make their escape. Back at headquarters, Ayanami learns the prisoner has escaped and immediately orders everyone to pursue him. Tato and Mikaj run into a pair of guards along the way, but manage to leap over them and keep going. Eventually, they find themselves cornered on a high balcony with only one way out, a jump. In a sudden move, Tato grabs Mikaj and pretends to take him hostage, his way of making sure Mikaj won't be seen as an accomplice and can stay at the academy. Using that moment of surprise, Tato dives down to the Hawksile waiting below and takes off. Ayanami quickly tracks him and fires off a powerful spell, but Tato just barely manages to raise a barrier in time, avoiding what could have been a fatal hit. Even so, the injury is serious, and by morning, Tato's body gives out. As he plummets from a terrifying height, he begins to lose consciousness, feeling as though he can reach out and touch the snow from his homeland. Meanwhile, three men fly through the same airspace in their own aircrafts. The blonde one, Frau, gets scolded for pulling risky maneuvers. Just then, Tato's Hawksile crashes nearby, triggering a landslide that hits Frau head-on. By sheer luck, Tato ends up falling right on top of him, the man's body breaking his fall after the impact. Back at the academy, President Moroku demands to know where Tato Klein is. He's far too valuable to lose. Ayanami promises he'll bring the fugitive back. Hours later, a search party locates the crash site in the 7th District, also known as the Domain of God. The problem? That place is known for offering asylum even to criminals, meaning the Empire has no jurisdiction there. They can't touch Klein inside those walls. The three men bring Tato to a safe place, suspecting he has one hell of a story to tell. But when he comes to, Tato immediately kicks Frau in the gut and tries to escape, only to accidentally fall from a high window. Frau catches him just in time. Still unsure why they're helping him, Tato demands answers. One of them explains they're part of the Barsberg Church of the 7th District. Basically, they're all clergymen. The redhead is Castor, the one with lilac hair is Labrador, and the blonde is Frau. The three had already noticed a mark on Tato's body, proof that he was once a slave. But they make it clear, he doesn't have to talk about his past unless he wants to. In this church, everyone is welcomed the same. That night, Tato thinks about his best friend, who, at that moment, is being handcuffed and interrogated by none other than Ayanami. Back at the church, Tato steps out of his room and is surprised to find the door unlocked. He could have left any time, but suddenly, he collapses and falls into a vivid dream. In it, he remembers President Moroku was his mentor all along, the one who trained him to kill off his emotions to become a more effective soldier. Among the memories, his father once told him that someday he'd discover his destiny. Just then, he's jolted awake by three nuns yelling at him. The one with blue hair is Athena, and the others are Rosalie and Libelle. With care and kindness, they carry this lost little lamb of God back to his room and treat him with nothing but love. Tato doesn't understand why anyone would be so kind for no reason. They tell him it's because he's lost and in pain, and his arrival here was a gift from God. Still, Tato insists God had nothing to do with it. It was Mikaj who saved him. Meanwhile, Ayanami begins interrogating Mikaj, trying to determine whether he helped Tato escape. By morning, Tato's pain is gone. As he steps out and sees the people walking happily through the church, he feels a strange sense of peace. But the memories from his dreams still haunt him. Memories that hint he really is from the kingdom of rags. At that moment, a desperate mother rushes into the church with her child, pleading for help. Castor notices a mark on the boy and immediately orders him inside. According to the locals, this church is the only place that can lift the curse of Verloren. The core, a being released before the god of death was sealed away a century ago, still roams the world, collecting human souls in exchange for 3 wishes. Those who make a pact with a servant of Verloren receive a mark on their chest. Minutes later, the child walks out of the sanctuary, completely healed by the bishops. The gathered crowd celebrates the protection granted by the 7 ghosts. Curious about these 7 ghosts, Tato heads to the church library in search of answers. After nearly dying of fright thanks to one of Castor's animated creations guarding the place, he grabs what looks like a military record book from the last century. But Frau spoils the moment, revealing that he actually hides adult content in there since, as a bishop, he can't exactly be caught with that stuff. Even so, with the 2 bishops there, they agree to help. Tato wants to learn more about the war from 10 years ago. Castor explains, long ago, there were 2 equally powerful nations. One was the Barsberg Empire, protected by the divine eye of Raphael. The other was the Kingdom of Rags, protected by the eye of Mikhail. They forged a pact to maintain peace and worked together for many years. But a decade ago, Rags broke the pact, attempting to seize control of both eyes. That act sparked a war against Barsberg and ultimately led to its own destruction. Tato hears this and can't believe it. Frau admits there's more than one version of the truth. After all, truth is only as strong as the number of people who believe it. If that story doesn't sit right with you, then you'll have to see the world through your own eyes. That lesson pushed Tito to search for the truth behind his father and why he ended up where he is now. But things only get more confusing when he stumbles upon a statue of a grim, eerie deity hidden within the church. Nearby, Athena explains that this is the guardian of the church. According to a centuries-old legend, Verloren, the god of death, committed a grave sin. He escaped from heaven to the surface, where he brought terror and committed unspeakable acts. In response, the chief of heaven sent the 7 ghosts to seal him away. The statue Tato saw was of Sichel. The remaining 6 statues are scattered across these lands. Then, as if Tato had stepped into a dream, the nun leads him to a towering door, the entrance to the domain of God, a realm that belongs to no one. Inside, all the bishops were gathered, and the sound of Mikhail's eye swinging back and forth echoed through the chamber. In a deeper vision, Tato sees himself as a baby in the arms of a religious figure, and the church begins to feel strangely familiar. Later, still surrounded by the unique atmosphere of the temple, the rescued guest watches as Labrador moves among the flowers, as if dancing with them. The bishop hands him a flower and offers a blessing. Watching from above, Frau and Castor exchange a look. It's rare for Labrador to gift someone a silver rose, a flower said to offer protection. They silently hope nothing bad is about to happen to the boy. Outside the sanctuary, cheerful children run around carrying giant torches with blue flames, used to light the lanterns of a nearby hall. Still in chains, Tato clutches the flower and studies it closely. Not far off, the nuns ask the bishops where the little Lamb of God is gone. They need to call him for dinner, among other things he still needs care for. Castor mentions that he was just in the back courtyard a moment ago. As night begins to fall, the gatekeeper calls out for everyone to leave. The gates are about to close. On his way out, Tato reflects on how grateful he is for having been saved, but wonders if he truly deserves to be there while Mikaj might be in danger. That's when Frau rushes in to stop the boy from running off, and Castor follows right behind. He picks up the flower that had fallen during the scuffle and tells Tato that the silver rose loses its meaning if it's not being worn. With care, he tucks it gently into Tato's hair. He looks absolutely adorable. After that, they drag the kid back into the church, all the way to a hall where the temple's clergy gather. The nuns welcome Tato warmly, with a meal already prepared for him at one of the seats. But when one of them lifts the lid of the dish, she cheerfully informs him that tonight's dinner is fisheye stew, something that doesn't faze Frau in the slightest, who immediately wolfs down the first eye with zero hesitation. Tato frantically looks for something else to eat, while Castor enjoys his salad, and Frau nearly steals another eye from the boy's plate. But Tato changes his mind and decides to give it a try. He eats one of the eyes straight off the bishop's fork. To his own surprise, he actually likes it. Without hesitation, he digs into the bowl and devours the whole thing. The nuns try to spark a conversation, asking the Lamb of God what his name is, but just the thought of talking about his past causes Tato to shrink in silence. Noticing the mood shift, they back off and drop the subject. Deep down, Tato wonders whether he even deserves to be surrounded by such kind people, especially when Mikaj might be going through the exact opposite. Back at the military academy, members of the organization gather to discuss Tato Klein's disappearance. They've received a report that his vehicle was found wrecked in District 7. Everyone speculates on why the boy would flee, but each person reaches a different conclusion. Whatever the reason, Ayanami is held responsible for letting him escape, especially since Klein is a prime candidate for Mikhail's eye. On the other hand, President Moroku reminds them that there are several other candidates. In fact, he's been considering naming Aya as a beg leader. Ayanami questions why the leader is protecting the boy, but Moroku replies that the Sklavo mark on Tato will keep him from finding refuge anywhere. Meanwhile, back at the church, Tato walks into his room only to find that the nuns have cleaned and organized everything for him. He feels guilty for not giving anything in return, so the sisters quickly find a task he can do. While the nuns scrub the church floor, Tato takes care of another section. Looking up at the moon, he can't help but think of Mikaj, and worry starts to creep back in. In the next scene, we dive into a memory. Tato, back in the Imperial Military Academy, reading a book in peace, until a few classmates show up to cause trouble. One of them had bird poop on his new shoes, and they demand that Tato, being a Sklavo, lick it clean. That day, Mikaj showed up to defend him, even though they didn't know each other yet. They both ended up in the military jail, where they had their very first conversation. Returning to the present, Tato makes a promise to God. He'll do whatever it takes to save his friend. The memory fuels a sense of urgency in him. He drops his mop and prepares to leave when an elderly man approaches. Looking up at the sky, he murmurs that tonight's moon is a sorrowful one whose light could freeze a person's soul. He sits down next to Tato and shares his story. His wife passed away and now rests in the church cemetery, but the thought of her being alone in that place makes it impossible for him to move on. Though he no longer has a place to call home, he believes meeting this boy tonight might have been God's will. He asks Tito what's weighing on him. Tito admits that he only remembers fragments of his past, and that he failed to protect a friend, even after swearing he would. The old man tells him we all live with regrets, but there is someone who can help ease that burden. If Tato wants to know more, he should return to that very spot, when the church bell rings at midnight. Later that day, the nuns searched everywhere for Tato, but he was nowhere to be found. Turns out, the boy was already in his room, more convinced than ever that he didn't belong there. He should have been out there, keeping the promise he made to his friend. With that in mind, after waiting a while, he quietly leaves his room in the middle of the night, determined to slip away. But once again, Frau blocks his path. Castor arrives moments later and suggests that Klein must have ended up at the church for a greater reason, that those who serve God can never turn their backs on someone seeking salvation. Tato snaps back, saying he doesn't need saving, and tries to force his way past Frau, launching a spell. But before it can hit, the bishop deflects it with ease. That's when Castor's suspicion is confirmed. Tato Klein can use Xiphon. According to the stories, many soldiers in the Imperial Army fight using a power known as Xiphon, and this kid might be one of them. Just then, Labrador shows up offering chamomile to Castor. Taking a moment to assess the scene, he explains that this young man can channel the gift of life in many forms, and that his power awakens through emotion. In Tato's case, it's clear, he's angry, and it's with that anger that he charges at Frau, completely unafraid. But no matter how bold the boy may be, the bishop dodges every attack effortlessly, making it clear he won't be touched, even if Tato pours every ounce of his power into the fight. And yet, despite the warning, Tato raises the stakes and unleashes a blast that tears through part of the bridge beneath them. But as the dust settles, Frau is suddenly behind him. and lands a punch so hard it feels like a system crash. Error 404. Tato not found. Castor thinks he may have gone too far, but Frau just shrugs it off, saying that maybe now the kid won't try to run again. Later, Tato is laid back into bed to rest, but once more, sleep brings no peace. His dreams torment him, and thoughts of Mikaj won't let him rest. Meanwhile, Mikaj is still being held prisoner. The Academy already knows he was with Tato during the escape, but Mikaj insists he was taken hostage, and claims he doesn't know anything else. That's when Ayanami plays dirty. He shows him a photo of his sister, and gives him a cruel choice: save his friend Tato, or protect his own family. Back at the church, Klein suddenly jolts awake in the middle of the night. He remembers the old man's words about returning to that place when the midnight bell tolls. That's when he'll meet someone who can help ease his regrets. Not long after, as the bishops pray and go about their duties around the church, the bell finally rings, signaling the start of a new day. Frau, meanwhile, is feeding a cat, but the animal suddenly reacts in a strange way and turns aggressive. And just like that, Tato arrives at the meeting spot. And there he is, the old man, once again. Without hesitation, the old man says he's been expecting the boy. As he approaches the ceiling, he asks if there's a wish the young man would like to see fulfilled. Tato nods. Yes, there is. Meanwhile, Aya waits for an answer from her prisoner, while her interrogation partner lets out a laugh. He finds it amusing that Mikaj is still thinking it over, as if choosing between his own family and a mere sklavo he barely knows should take this long. Growing tired of the game, Ayanami says nothing and silently leaves the room. His partner then warns the prisoner that the man will return, with something up his sleeve. At the same time, the old man recalls that Tato once complained about how hard it was to remember his past. Holding a photograph of the boy and his father, the old man gently runs his hand over it, releasing a dark energy. That energy pulls Tato into the jumbled recesses of his memory, and from the fragments, a truth emerges. He had always been alone, until Mikaj. No matter what happened, Mikaj was always there for him. With that in his heart, Tato asks God to protect his best friend. The old man responds, if Tato is willing to give up his soul, that wish can be granted. As grotesque as the offer is, Tato is so caught up in the moment that he doesn't even react. He simply agrees, without a hint of hesitation. Not only does he accept it, he reaffirms his desire to see his closest companion again. With that, the strange being throws him into an illusion, one where Mikaj stands just ahead. Tato runs toward him, but as he gets close, the rose that Labrador gave him shatters, and a demon reveals itself behind him. The illusion breaks into pieces, snapping Tato back to reality. There, beside him, are the three bishops who saved his life. Frau tells Tato not to let the darkness consume his heart. Then he turns to the old man and scolds him for being out of bed at this hour, adding that if he wishes, his confession can be heard tomorrow. But instead of responding normally, the old man reveals skeletal wings on his back and declares that he'd rather take the boy with him. After all, Tato came seeking salvation. Tato, surprisingly, agrees with the old man's claim. That's when Frau turns to the core and asks if his brand of salvation carries the blessing of God. Upon hearing his species named out loud, the core drops the act and lets his demonic voice ring out. He snarls that the bishop doesn't understand how valuable the boy is, that bringing him back to his master would be well worth the reward. Without wasting time, Frau summons a scythe. The core recognizes it immediately. It belongs to his master. Enraged, he attacks with all his fury. Tato dodges the enemy's ability and prepares his Xiphon, but Frau warns him, if he's not careful, he could end up hurting the old man. At that moment, a ghostly head bursts from the floor, aiming for Tato. Frau throws his scythe to drive it back. The weapon embeds itself into one of the pillars, and Tato is left bewildered, not just by the attack, but by the fact that he can actually see the weapon. Even Frau is surprised by that. The core tries to flee, but Labrador uses a silver rose and stops the demon in its tracks. Seizing the moment, Frau pulls his scythe back by the cord attached to it, which drags Tato along with it since he's still tied to the pillar. When the bishop is attacked again, he tosses Tato into Labrador's arms and deflects the ghosts hurled his way, closing the distance between him and the enemy with each step. Realizing he's within Frau's attack range, the core panics and leaps toward the fountain in the courtyard. But demonic arms rise and pull the old man downward, dragging him back to the underworld. Before disappearing, the core vows to return for Tato's soul, but Castor won't let him escape so easily. He uses reinforced magic threads to ensnare the core, who screams in pain. Unable to understand how he's being bested by mere humans, the demon finds a small comfort in one thing: the scythe is still alive, which must mean its master is too. That hope is short-lived. Frau launches himself skyward with inhuman force and shatters the demon's wings with a crushing blow. Still reeling, Tato blurts out, "What the hell just happened?" Castor calmly explains. The old man's soul had been stolen by a core, a servant of the underworld that tricks humans into embracing darkness. Thankfully, the bishops managed to rescue his spirit. Tato watches as Frau slides the scythe back into his own arm and asks, "Doesn't that hurt?" Frau ignores the question and instead asks if the kid's not even a little scared after everything that just happened. Suddenly, the old man wakes as if from a terrible nightmare. Labrador offers him a bed in the church for the night, and as Castor carries the man off, Frau grabs Tato like a sack of luggage and hauls him onto his back. On their way, Castor admits he never expected to find a core inside the church, while Labrador picks a silver rose from the garden and notes that the flowers are still unsettled. Soon enough, despite Tato's protests, Frau tosses him onto a bed. He explains that being gentle won't cut it anymore. Things are just getting started. If Tito doubts that, he should just look at his chest. The bishop removes a glove and prepares to get rid of the mark left there. Normally, someone branded by a core becomes emotionally unstable, but this brat is stubborn enough to hold his ground. After removing the mark, Frau leaves Tato alone, who now regrets having trusted the core and causing this whole mess. Meanwhile, Chief Ayanami is informed by Major Katsuragi that preparations for the next phase are complete, except for Mikaji. After their superior leaves, a few officers mutter behind his back, saying he's just a spoiled rich kid who got the job because of his family name. But Aya's assistant casually walks by and slices open every one of their pants, leaving them all exposed. Back with Aya, he assures Miroku that Tato will be captured. Miroku replies with a somber nod, reminding him that boy was once his strongest disciple. The next day, Tato steps out of his room and is stunned by how beautiful everything around him is. Having lived his whole life as a soldier, he never had the time or the sensitivity to appreciate things like this. Outside, the nuns were washing his clothes, though Rosalie got distracted and took a clumsy, embarrassing tumble. Hoping not to make the scene any worse, Tato quickly snatches up his dirty underwear and makes a run for it before the girls can see. On his way, he accidentally bumps into Frau. Before anything else, the bishop tells him that he's only allowed to leave once he truly feels ready for what lies ahead. Curiously, Tato thanks him for everything he's done, and in response, the bishop picks up the boy's dirty underwear and tosses it high into the air. In his rush to grab it back, Tito stumbles right into the fountain and ends up being grabbed by a mermaid. To calm things down, Castor introduces the girl as Rosette, the church's organist. She instantly takes a liking to Tato, so much so that she hides behind him when Frau comes over. Putting that aside, Castor explains that the old man from the day before actually does have a place to go. Apparently, his family just found him. Later, Tato asks about the core. Castor explains that when the Chief of Heaven first granted life to humanity, he also gave each person 3 wishes. Once those wishes were fulfilled, that person's soul would return to him. The core do something similar, but twisted. They grant human desires only to drag them into the darkness. After your first wish is granted by a core, you start to feel empty. After the second, a deep hunger sets in. And after the third, your soul is consumed entirely, lost forever to the dark, adding to the core's numbers as they await the return of Verloren. After sharing this story, Castor asks Tato what his own dream would be. Meanwhile, Mikaj can't stop thinking about his best friend. He remembers a time when Shuriok said Tato was nothing more than a slave to his family. But that time, Tato had his back, shutting Shuri up with a solid punch to the face. At that moment, Aya walks into the room and says she's with the prisoner's sister. Then she asks again, is he really willing to save his family? As he walks through the church, Tato reflects on how he never really knew what his dream was, until now. Soon, both he and Mikaj come to realize that their friendship is what truly matters most in their lives. Meanwhile, Ayanami begins preparing his Xiphon, ready to end the prisoner's life. Back at the church, Tato feels helpless, far from his friend and unsure of what to do. His sadness is plain to see. The bishops quietly wonder what could have pushed Tato to sell his soul to a core. Deep in thought, Tato worries that Mikaj might be suffering for helping him escape, and the thought crushes him. At the military academy, Major Hugo reviews protocol. When a criminal escapes, the Imperial Army locks down a 500-meter perimeter, the exact range of a Hawksile. Yet somehow, Tato Klein made it all the way to the 7th District without being spotted. That's when a new report comes in. Apparently, a Wendy, a monster capable of taking down even the Empire's finest aircraft, was seen near the bay that same day. Which means, if Klein's still alive, he must have flown right past the Wendy. Back at the church, the nuns were struggling to carry a few things when Tito offers to help. But the girls insist they can manage, and they do seem used to lifting much heavier loads. Besides, they say, it's their way of showing gratitude to God for the sacred mission they've been given. They hope Tato finds his own mission too. Left alone, Tato stands in front of the fountain, deep in thought, wondering why everyone here is being so kind to him. Just then, Rosette appears. Since she can't speak, she silently points him toward the chapel. As he approaches, a memory surfaces, his father giving him the Eye of Mikhail, the legendary gem of rags, so he could one day inherit the legacy. That's his mission, to never let the Imperial Army lay their hands on the relic. In other words, Tato is the heir to the throne of Rags, and an enemy of Barsberg. In his mind, everyone here is treating him kindly because they know who he is, and maybe they're even hiding him. The thought that others might be in danger because of him weighs heavily on his heart. Elsewhere, Labrador senses the flowers in the garden are still trembling, a sure sign that someone is coming, someone who could destroy Tato's world. Right then, Tato steps outside the church gates, and the wind blows his silver rose to the ground. As he bends down to pick it up and looks up again, he sees his best friend arriving at the sanctuary and pulling him into a hug. Watching from afar, Labrador looks heartbroken, and Frau realizes this is the person who might end up destroying Tato's world. Without delay, the bishops begin questioning Mikaj about how he got there. The boy explains that he escaped the Imperial Army and managed to find the place. The bishops decide to let him stay as long as he needs. Still, Tato wonders if it's truly safe for him to be there. By staying, he could be putting everyone's lives at risk. Even so, Mikaj needs time to recover. He went through a dangerous escape and isn't ready to travel again just yet. Frau promises to whip the kid back into shape soon enough and even shows him one of his favorite books to lift his spirits. After the bishops leave the room, they quietly express doubt about how Mikaj knew Tato was at the church. Still, Labrador insists Mikaj isn't the one destined to destroy Tato's world. And while Frau remains suspicious, Castor reminds him that Labrador's prophecies always come true. Just then, the Archbishop shows up to remind them that the annual baptism ceremony is happening at tomorrow's Mass, and that the bishops must care for every sheep in their flock. With that, Castor promises to keep a close eye on both Tato and Mikaj, and summons his doll to help. That afternoon, Tato takes Mikaj to the church garden so they can talk in peace. While it's good to see his friend again, Tato can't help but ask, how did Mikaj know where to find him? Mikaj explains that he spotted the crashed Hawksile nearby. Since Tato seemed to believe the story, his friend went on to say that he'd been interrogated by Aya, but released after a few days. Either way, since Mikaj would be staying for a while, Tato warned him up front not to trust that pervert Frau. Mikaj just laughed. In his eyes, those two actually balanced each other out. Suddenly, a boy tending to the garden walked up to them and asked if they liked the flowers growing there. Meanwhile, Aya was wondering how Klein would manage to escape from the little cage he'd been placed in. Back in the garden, the mysterious boy claimed that the flowers were an offering, something meant to help fulfill his dream. Tato noticed a mark on the boy's chest and immediately attacked with his Xiphon, but the opponent countered with the same power and canceled it out. Klein yelled for Mikaj to run, but his friend refused to leave him behind and insisted on fighting together. That's when the stranger revealed his true nature. He was another core. The force of his power was overwhelming, pushing the two boys back as best they could. Still, Tito feared Mikaj would be hit, so he braced himself and rushed back into the fight, forcing the core to retreat. But Tato wasn't about to let him get away that easily. He chased after the enemy and managed to draw his attention again. The two clashed fiercely in a battle with no clear winner. Just then, as the monster tried to circle around a church tower, his wings were blasted off by Frau, who reminded Tato once again that his powers could only wound a core. They couldn't finish them. With that, the bishop dragged the creature back into the church. Later that night, Tato shared a secret with his best friend. He was the rightful heir to the throne of Rags. Mikaj just laughed and said he'd always sensed that royal aura around him anyway. In return, Mikaj opened up about his own past. When the Rags War ended, he was only 5 years old. His father had celebrated their victory, but as a child, Mikaj couldn't understand why anyone would feel joy after the deaths of so many. Klein's father, along with countless others, had died in that war. And even though Mikaj was born in the country that destroyed Rags and felt like he didn't have the right to say this, the truth was, he was glad Tato had at least experienced the love of a father. That moment stuck with Tato. He now felt a deep sense of duty to study his homeland and its history. But Mikaj pleaded with him, not to become an enemy of the Empire. Vengeance wasn't the answer. Tato needed to walk the path of light, no matter how hard it seemed. Whatever happened, Mikaj would always be praying for him to have a bright future. That last part left a bitter taste in Tato's mouth. It almost felt like Mikaj was saying goodbye. At the same time, the bishops were discussing the recent string of events. With the second incident occurring so soon after the first, they couldn't help but wonder if Tato Klein's arrival was somehow the cause. Back in the Empire, Hugo wanted to know why Ayanami had let Mikaj go. The commander didn't offer any explanation, but his men were convinced he had a greater plan in mind. Meanwhile, the mood at the church was festive and warm. As the nuns explained to Tato and Mikaj, they held a bazaar every year as part of the annual baptism ceremony. Even with the cheerful atmosphere, Tato admitted he was still anxious about Mikaj leaving again, but his friend reassured him he wasn't going anywhere. As they continued chatting, they discovered that even the bishops were helping out with the festival. In fact, Labrador's flower stall was always a favorite. He only made his famous sweet flowers during this time of year. Not only did they taste good, they were great for your skin and heart too. Next, the boys visited another bishop's stall. Judging by all the dolls scattered everywhere, there was no need to guess who was behind it. Frau didn't even try to hide it. Just then, Castor appeared. Rosalie was smitten by one of the doll dresses and muttered that such clothes didn't belong in this kind of event. Libelle quickly dragged the girls out before Castor could explode over the insult. Finally, Mikaj wanted to know if Frau had a booth too, so Frau brought the boys over to his little skewer stand. Honestly, Tato thought the bishop wasn't even allowed to eat meat, but Frau couldn't care less what the kid thought. He handed them both a skewer without blinking. They liked the flavor and asked what kind of meat it was. Frau just shrugged and said, "Anything can taste good if you know how to cook it, right?" Naturally, that set off alarm bells in the boys' heads, until Rosalie showed up with the ingredients Frau had requested: winkfram, disgusting little monsters that sent Tato and Mikaj running for their lives. After recovering from the culture shock, Mikaj took a deep breath and admitted that, despite everything, this place was kind of nice. But Tato, always thinking ahead, asked what Mikaj planned to do next. Mikaj replied that he could return to the military without putting Klein at risk. All he had to do was report that he never saw the boy at the church. Tato wasn't so sure the officials would buy that story, but Mikaj insisted it would be fine. At that very moment, Commander Ayanami received orders to take control of a city where a fugitive Sklavo was reportedly organizing a rebellion. On top of that, President Miroku was still pressuring him to capture Tato Klein. Ayanami, however, remained unshaken. He made it clear the mission would be completed successfully. Later on, the church filled with people for the baptism ceremony. Outside the chapel, Tato caught Frau on his way in and pulled him aside. He confessed that he was worried about Mikaj. Even though Mikaj claimed he could return to the Imperial Army without trouble, Tato knew it wouldn't be that simple. He felt like Mikaj was hiding something, just so Tato wouldn't worry. Not wanting to cause more problems for his friend, Tato asked the bishop to hide Mikaj at the church once he left. Frau didn't have a problem with that, though he had a feeling Mikaj might already have chosen a different path. Meanwhile, an Imperial airship soared through the skies toward its target. The soldiers on board believed it was just another routine mission to wipe out a random rebel group. But Hyuga knew better. He was certain Chief Aya had something unexpected up his sleeve. And sure enough, the man himself was well aware that things were about to get interesting. Not long after, Mikaj sat calmly by the church gates when a carriage came tearing past him and crashed straight into the entrance. The boy rushed over, hoping to find survivors, only to discover his sister inside, unconscious, with a core mark glowing on her chest. Without wasting a second, he carried her into the chapel for baptism. Inside, Rosette played the organ, providing the soundtrack to a seemingly normal mass. Suddenly, Mikaj's sister stirred and warned him. She had to hurry, or everyone would die. And right on cue, Ayanami set his master plan in motion. The girl revealed her true form. She was a core. Mikaj managed to back away, but the sight of his sister with those wings froze him in place. At that moment, Castor warned the archbishop. A core was inside the church. Outside, the winged girl wreaked havoc as she passed through the crowd, terrifying the worshippers. Despite her pleas not to be left alone, Mikaj couldn't bring himself to abandon her. He darted into a restricted area, one he didn't even know existed, desperate to stay near her, even if he had no clue where he was heading. The place was strange, to say the least. Meanwhile, Tato learned of the core's appearance and immediately set off in search of his friend. Trapped by his sister, Mikaj dodged her attacks as he racked his brain for a way to save her. At one point, a wing strike nearly landed a devastating blow, but Tato arrived just in time, shielding his friend with a burst of Xiphon. Castor's dolls then charged at the core, but were quickly taken down. The moment he lost contact with them, the bishop feared for Tato and Mikaj's lives. Then Mikaj's sister spoke. She had always been alone. Their parents only ever cared about Mikaj, the family heir, while she was left forgotten. But now, she'd never be alone again. She would make sure her brother stayed by her side. Forever. With that, she wrapped her arms around Mikaj from behind, sparking Tato's fury, exactly as Ayanami had planned. Tato tried to strike her down but was easily overpowered. Mikaj was seconds away from being killed. And that's when the eye of Mikhail, hidden within Klein, awakened. The power surging from the boy was so intense that it caught the core's attention, forcing her to pause her final blow. That's when Frau arrived, and with a single strike, he destroyed the demon's wings. Witnessing the core's defeat in an instant, Chief Ayanami demanded to know who this newcomer was. Later, Tato Klein finally woke up in the same place. Before him stood his best friend, holding his sister in his arms. Mikaj asked if his hand hurt, but Tato felt nothing. The other bishops arrived shortly after, and Labrador made one thing clear. Mikaj wouldn't be the one to destroy Tato's world. But even so, his arrival had undeniably shaken its foundation. The next day, the line to enter the church had turned into a massive crowd, just like it always had since that institution became a symbol of relief, offering not only a sense of purpose but enough hope for people to see the future as something more than a constant struggle of hunger and war in such a chaotic world. Even after the recent attacks on this sacred ground, the people remained undeterred, continuing their routine of work and prayer inside. Life, after all, must go on, no matter what. Watching the morning bustle of the market, Mikaj stood deep in thought. He didn't want to put his family in danger, and the only way to avoid that was to die before he was forced back into the army. That meant he needed to leave the church while he still had control over his body. The problem was, if he left, he'd never see Tato again. As if summoned by those very thoughts, his friend suddenly appeared after searching for him everywhere. Mikaj remarked how lively the place felt, like their school festival all over again. Tato explained that today was the final day of the bazaar, an event held to bring comfort to children who'd lost their families to the war. Speaking of which, he invited Mikaj to come watch the parade with him, and so, the two of them set off. Meanwhile, Castor's doll kept a quiet eye on the visitors. As for the doll's owner, he went to visit Rosette and announce the start of the Mass. The organist slipped beneath the bishop's robe to change into her nun's habit and prepare for the same ceremony she always performed. Later, seated before her instrument, she played the opening notes of the music that would score the long-awaited event. The chords echoed through the air like a celestial choir of women, casting a warm, magical glow over the entire church. Outside, in the square where the parade was about to begin, the crowd waited eagerly for the spectacle, including Tato and Mikaj. It didn't take long before towering statues of the Apostles of God were paraded out, each one cloaked in black robes and gripping scythes in their skeletal hands. Amid all the commotion, Mikaj spotted a young red-haired boy with striking green eyes. In a flashback, we see a younger Tato walking among his fellow cadets, enduring the same bullying as always due to his origins as a slave. That day, Mikaj had come up behind him suddenly, and Tato nearly punched him out of pure irritation. But Mikaj didn't respond with anger. Quite the opposite. He just asked what was bothering his friend. Of course, Tato denied anything was wrong. Back in the present, Mikaj laughed to himself at how wound up Tato used to be. And right on cue, the guy returned, this time to offer him another one of Frau's notoriously awful snacks. Honestly, Tato hadn't even wanted to mention the food stand was still open, but the bishop had asked him to. Afterward, Mikaj pointed out the red-haired boy and called him over, but the kid took off running, and, out of pure curiosity, Mikaj gave chase. At that same moment, an Imperial airship continued along its route toward a mission that, according to Hyuga, was located in the middle of nowhere. Their task? Deal with combat sklavos. Katsuragi remarked that to save face, the High Command often took advantage of the silence to send lower-ranking officers on pointless missions like this. Aya asked who should go, and the small boy napping in a soldier's lap volunteered himself. Back in the city, Mikaj had lost the kid, and, when asked why he'd chased him in the first place, he joked that the boy's tense expression reminded him of how Tato used to look. Suddenly, the red-haired boy reappeared, this time running from a baker after stealing a loaf of bread. In the chase, the baker tripped over Castor's foot and fell. Seeing the incident, the bishop stepped in to help the man up, explaining that it was the final day of the bazaar, the day children received the god's blessings. In his eyes, the boy wasn't a threat, and he deserved forgiveness. Just then, Labrador arrived and placed a flower called delphinium on the baker's chest, a symbol of compassion. Feeling a little embarrassed, the man agreed to let the boy off the hook. Meanwhile, Tato and Mikaj caught up with the kid and advised him to ask for help next time instead of stealing. They returned the bread he'd dropped during the chase, but asked that he be grateful, both to the baker and to the church. At that moment, the nuns began performing a play for the audience, a retelling of one of the region's local legends. Chewing eagerly on his bread, the boy finally told them his name, Taggio. He said he looked angry all the time, because if he didn't, people would make fun of him. His mother had died, and his father had left to find work. Despite how tough his life had been, Mikaj and Tato wished he'd let the church take care of him. They were good at that. But Taggio didn't think anyone could survive by showing weakness. Besides, he needed to be there when his father came back. Right then, he started choking on the bread and ran off to find water. Tato admitted that he used to hide his sadness too, just so no one would think he was weak. At the water fountain, after catching his breath, Taggio caught part of the play, one where a nun was pretending to cut off a piece of someone's flesh as part of a sacred contract. Thinking it was real, Taggio bolted to stop her, grabbing the prop knife like a hero in the making. Mikaj jumped onto the stage and swept the kid away, pretending it was all part of the act. Once they were away from the crowd, Mikaj explained that it was just a play, but Taggio had no idea what a play even was. Just then, a man called out his name. It was his father. The boy ran to him and threw his arms around him. The man apologized through tears and thanked Mikaj and Tato for watching over his son. He had finally earned enough money to live by the boy's side. Before parting ways, he shook Tato's hand, and when he noticed the chains on his wrist, he gave a sly, knowing smile. As he walked away, Mikaj heard Ayanami's voice echo in his mind once again, forcing him to make that impossible choice between Tato and his own family. Tato, now suspicious, ran after the man, having noticed something chilling. His hand was ice cold. At that moment, the Imperial ship touches down at its destination, and two agents disembark with a clear mission. Almost instantly, a massive gang of men appears, ready to spring an ambush. Kuroyuri assures Harus that he'll take care of most of the enemies himself, then launches into battle, unleashing the devastating power of his Xiphon, which whips into a tornado and knocks down several foes in one go. Meanwhile, inside the church, the man standing with Taggio confesses his true intent. He plans to steal the boy's soul, and he's not his real father. Right then, Tato bursts onto the scene and tells the kid to run. Taggio bites the man's hand and manages to break free. The man finally reveals his true form, spreading the dark wings of a core. No longer hiding, he transforms his wings into magical whips and launches into a relentless assault on the two. But just as things grow dire, Mikaj arrives to help. The core lashes out, but Tato is shielded by a barrier summoned by the eye of Mikhail. Watching the fight unfold through the core's vision, Ayanami is convinced he's finally found what he was looking for. Elsewhere, Labrador and Castor pay Frau's tent a visit. Castor's puppet then reveals what's happening with Tato in real time. Tato tries to understand how he managed to survive, but the core resumes its attack, determined to end the battle. At the critical moment, Frau steps in. He cancels the enemy's spell and strikes a fatal blow. Ayanami is visibly thrilled with his recent discovery, just as the two officers return from the mission they had just completed. With the core now defeated, Tagio's father returns to normal, and the two quietly leave the church. Mikage reflects on how Tato didn't hesitate for a second to save that boy. And since Tato feels like family to him, there's no way he'd ever hand him over to the army. Castor laments the number of attacks the church has suffered lately, and Frau admits he felt like someone was watching him when he took down the last core. And speaking of that unseen presence, Aya continues whispering into Mikage's mind, forcing him to choose his best friend or his family. Days later, Tato reflects on how everything's felt like a blur since Mikage arrived, how time just flies when you're having fun. But happiness never lasts forever. All we can do is stand and watch it fade away, like flowers swaying in the wind. Mikage, on the other hand, isn't much for poetic talk. He'd rather know which nun Tato thinks is the prettiest. He bets it's Rosalie. Clumsy as she is, she's beautiful, and that's part of her charm. Tato has no patience for this nonsense, and the two break into a playful argument. Watching them interact, Castor muses that even if everyone seems at peace on the surface, he's not the only one who senses the tension in the air. Labrador adds that even flowers mourn, and Frau finishes the thought. This is all just too quiet, like the calm before a storm. After 5 minutes of friendly bickering, the skies suddenly darken. As Tato reaches out to help Mikage up, he notices his friend's hand is ice cold, just like that core's. Neither of them understands what's happening, but Aya's influence is creeping deeper into Mikage's mind, and things are only going to get worse. The bishops know that only half of Mikage's soul remains in his body. If nothing is done, there'll be nothing left of him. As serious as this is, they still don't know how to save him. Castor sends his puppet to watch over Mikage in hopes of learning something, anything. Mikage, confused and distressed, tries to make sense of it all. A moment ago, he almost attacked Tato without knowing why. Later, during Mass, Tato recalls the moment his father gave him the Eye of Mikhail, a relic that holds the entire history of Rags. One day, Tato will inherit that legacy, and he knows he can't stay in this church forever. Inside the chapel, the bishops argue over responsibilities beyond Tato and Mikage. They're not the only ones the church must protect. Mikage's head pounds with unbearable pain. He staggers toward the flower garden. And when Rosette strikes a somber chord, Aya sinks deeper into his mind, trying to convince him he has to kill Tato Klein. The thought pushes Mikage to the brink. Tato finds him and rushes to his side, but Mikage pleads for him to stay away. Speaking in vague, broken words, Mikage admits he's not the friend Tato believes he is. Then, as a final request, he begs Tato to kill him. It's the only way he can die with what little remains of himself still intact. But Tato can't understand. He refuses to even consider it. At the same time, Mikage recalls the third option Aya gave him. If he refuses to surrender either Tato or his family, he will die instead. And that's what he chose, because he can't betray someone he sees as family. Finally, Mikage manages to say it. Ayanami is behind all of this, but it might already be too late. Inside Mikage's mind, the stolen piece of his soul tries to force him to kill his best friend, while the part that remains resists with all its strength. In the end, the darkness wins, and Mikage attacks. Castor's puppet jumps in, shielding Tato from what could have been a fatal blow. The puppet takes the hit and is badly damaged. At that exact moment, Castor loses connection with the puppet stationed in the West Tower. All the while, Mass continues as if nothing's happening. Tato tries to escape from the friend who's now trying to kill him. Realizing there's no other way out, Tato fights back with his own Xiphon, though he knows he won't hold out for long. And just like that, after only a few seconds, Mikage overpowers him, knocking him to the ground. Still, Tato manages to escape. As he runs, he wonders how someone could steal the soul of his best friend, and how much pain that's causing them both. He soon finds a locked door deep inside the church, and kicks it open. But Mikage is already there somehow, fed up with the game of cat and mouse. Watching from within Mikage's mind, Ayanami sees the door sealing shut and realizes what's happening. Barsberg Church is trying to cut him off. Because of the situation, Frau asks the other bishops to continue the mass without him, then rushes off to handle the most urgent case. At that moment, Mikaj reveals his skeletal wings. Tato is stunned to see his friend transformed into a core, but Ayanami doesn't believe that's the right term for what he truly is. Tato tries to bargain with the demon, offering himself in exchange to save his best friend, but Aya has no interest in making deals. He's only there to end the boy's life. And just like that, he brutally overwhelms Klein, not giving him even a second to react, his speed nothing short of terrifying. With his target subdued, the commander orders him to place a limiter and return to the military. Suddenly, the platform beneath Tato collapses, sending him plunging into the waters below. As he sinks, a flood of memories washes over him. Moments of friendship, of camaraderie with Mikaj, and that triggers something deep inside, a final surge, one last will to survive. Then, rising from the water, Tato re-emerges, empowered by Xiphon, ready to fight once again. He remembers, when core-possessed victims had their wings destroyed, they returned to normal. The wings, that's the target. Still, the gap in strength and speed is overwhelming, and once again, Tato is effortlessly restrained. Growing impatient, Ayanami repeats that he is not a core. If Tato destroys the wings, this body will die, and Mikaj's soul will be lost forever. Back at the Mass, the Archbishop notices Frau's absence and asks Castor where he went. Castor explains, a boy with only half his soul intact has been possessed by a one-winged core. Frau, now revealing his true form as an apostle of the gods, sets out to find the boys in danger, but he can't even sense their presence. Suddenly, spiritual-looking girls approach and tell him they've isolated intruders inside the Bridge of Judgments. At first, they resist his request, but after he convinces them the boys pose no threat, they agree to open the way. Using a military device, Ayanami removes Tato's cuffs, placing the limiter on him instead, and reveals that his mission is to capture Tato alive under President Moroku's orders. Tato sees an opportunity. If he dies, Ayanami fails his mission. But Aya doesn't hesitate. He controls Tato using the limiter. Meanwhile, Klein finds himself thrown into a strange space. In front of him, a staircase. With each step, he sees visions of himself aging, joining the army, fleeing to the church, moments flashing by, year after year. At the top of the stairs, he sees Tato's spirit, chained to a sinister statue, glowing with a strange light. Tato is horrified by the scene, but his will to save Mikaj keeps him focused. He shatters the statue with a single blow, freeing the soul. As it returns to its human body, a divine figure begins to form before him. Suddenly, Klein lets out a scream, one loud enough for the three bishops to hear. Labrador senses it. The boy is about to awaken. Ayanami feels Mikaj's body begin to weep uncontrollably. Then, the Eye of Mikhail takes possession of Tato and demands to know, was it that man who placed the collar around his neck? Ayanami watches the scene unfold, stunned by what he's witnessing. Elsewhere, Frau picks up the pace, trembling with frustration, afraid he won't make it in time. Tato's eyes turn crimson, glowing with a menacing aura. He launches himself at Ayanami, driven by unrelenting fury. But Aya's magical shield holds strong, so the Eye of Mikhail activates level 10, and the resulting blast sends shockwaves through the battlefield. As the dust settles, Tato's arm now bears a grotesque manifestation. Aya takes note. He's grown powerful, even with the limiter on. Meanwhile, Klein is spiraling, screaming for the enemy to remove the collar. Surging with raw power, he destroys nearly everything around him. But Ayanami stays sharp, countering his attacks and locking him down with the bind technique. He wanted the boy alive, but the risk is too high. The commander decides to strangle the soldier to death. Tato Klein is at death's door, until Frau finally reaches the Bridge of Judgments, nullifying Ayanami's spell. A battle erupts between them. After a few fierce exchanges, Aya calls him by a different name, Sichel. Tato recognizes it. He's heard that name before. It was the name of the massive statue in the chapel. According to Athena, Sichel is a god who carries away our suffering. She never met him in person, but she believed he'd return when they needed one of the 7 ghosts the most. Realizing Frau is actually a god, Tato begs him to save Mikaj. Ayanami, meanwhile, knows that continuing to fight in this body would leave him at a serious disadvantage. Sichel becomes enraged that the enemy is feeding on the soul of that poor boy, and he threatens to attack. But Tato grabs his robe, shouting that Mikage is still alive. Aya calmly corrects him. No, Mikage can only cry in silence now. His soul is trapped in an endless, agonizing void, condemned to wander the depths of despair. With that, Ayanami passes his scythe clean through Sichel's body, without even touching him, and then declares that Klein should seek vengeance against the Imperial Army. Finally, Aya remarks that the scythe is destined to return to him someday, but until then, Sichel should take good care of it. Hearing those words, Sichel realizes who this creature really is, but Klein ignores the danger. He throws his arms around the body Ayanami is wearing, swearing to die with Mikage. Yet his best friend's body vanishes, without a trace. After leaving the battlefield, Ayanami heals a wound bleeding on his face. To himself, he admits, he didn't expect to encounter the Eye of Mikhail, but now, it all makes sense. President Miroku's interest in that boy. At the church, Frau carries Tato back home, and the boy remembers. Mikage was the only one who never messed with him at school. He never cared about the rumors, never judged him like the others. Mikage looked straight into the real Tato, and was his one true friend in life. One day, the two were having lunch on the academy rooftop when Tato suddenly pulled out a jar full of pills and tossed a handful into his mouth. Mikage immediately snatched the jar from his hand, thinking his friend was doing something reckless with medication, but it turned out they were just nutrient pills. Still, Mikage figured the guy was going to drop dead someday if he kept living off of nothing but tablets. On top of that, Tato had been skipping class like crazy lately, and Mikage wanted to know what he was up to. As soon as he asked, Tato recalled the man he'd killed and replied coldly that it was none of Mikage's business, and told him to get lost. But Mikage didn't back down. He was determined to help his friend, so he made Tato eat some oatmeal and fried fish, just so he could experience what real food tasted like. Up until that moment, Tato had always seen eating as nothing more than a way to get nutrients. But now, tasting something truly delicious for the first time, he actually broke down in tears. Thinking the oatmeal was just that good, Mikage asked for a bowl too. Later that day, as Tato lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about his best friend who had just passed away. Frau let him grieve in peace. Sometime later, the bishops and nuns knocked on Tato's door, but he didn't respond. Castor guessed the emotional pain was hitting hard, but even so, they needed to understand why Tato had been considered an intruder by the guardians of the Hall of Judgment. That's when Frau showed up, with food in one hand and a heavy foot. He kicked the door down without a second thought. Tato protested, saying nobody should enter without permission, but the bishop introduced the little creature that would now be in charge of his divine-assisted therapy. Tato, however, didn't believe in God, especially not a God who didn't save his best friend. In the end, though, he blamed himself for not keeping the promise he made to protect Mikage. Frau insisted it wasn't his fault. He told him the story of the Chief of Paradise, a tale in which people promise to fulfill 3 dreams, and once they do, they return to the divine realm in the sky. According to the bishop, Mikage's 3rd dream had undoubtedly been to protect the people he loved, even if it cost him his life. And since all his dreams had come true, Mikage was able to return to paradise in peace. Tato, of course, brushed it off as just another fairy tale meant to comfort kids. But Frau pressed on. Even if that were true, Mikage still found his way back to where he belonged, by Tato's side. After all, when a soul completes its dreams, it's reborn. And that's exactly what happened. Mikage had reincarnated as the little creature in Tato's hands. The color of its soul was identical to Mikage's, and even though it had no memory of its past life, Mikage had managed to find his best friend again in this vast world. Overwhelmed by the story, Tato accepted the little creature as Mikage reborn. Watching the emotional moment unfold, Frau swore that the enemy who messed with Mikage's soul would pay dearly. The fact that the guy had recognized his scythe made Frau suspect he might have been reincarnated without the god's knowledge. Then, in true Frau fashion, he tried to yank Tato's limiter off by force, only to be hilariously smacked around by the device. Unlike Frau, Labrador took a more rational approach and pointed out that the bishop had accidentally triggered the collar's oath, one that only recognizes its master through blood. From now on, Frau wouldn't be able to stay away from Tato for more than 48 hours, or the collar would explode. Startled by the revelation, both of them were momentarily stunned, but quickly got distracted by Mikaj's cuteness and decided to just let the whole mess slide. The next day, Mikaj's body is laid to rest. The bishops attend the funeral alongside the nuns. After the ceremony, Tato remains alone for a while at his friend's grave. He gently lays a bouquet of flowers as a final tribute. Watching from a distance, Labrador quietly notes that the flowers are crying, while Castor remarks that Tato's heart is fragile. Throughout the day, Tato can't stop thinking about what just happened. It weighs heavily on him. He can't let it slide. And the moment he recognized those cold, merciless eyes, he knew exactly who he needed to take revenge on. Speaking of that person, Ayanami is told by the president that Tato is on the verge of awakening, which means Ayanami is the only one capable of handling him. Surprised, Aya confronts the president for hiding the eye of Mikhail, warning that if the higher-ups find out, Miroku will face a court-martial. But Miroku just laughs, saying he didn't want to involve the military yet. The plan was always to tell Aya once Tato began showing signs of awakening. Still, Aya believes the boy from Rags poses a threat to the Empire and must be eliminated. Miroku agrees, on one condition: the eye of Mikhail must be captured separately. But he warns Ayanami that he might regret taking the boy's life. Back at the church, Tato informs Castor that he's leaving, this time for good. He's heading to the Hoburg fortress. Though Castor had no intention of interfering, he ends up revealing that he too is a god, just like Frau. He then uses his powers to put Tato to sleep, insisting the boy must forget everything he learned about the 7 ghosts. Meanwhile, Chief Ayanami briefs his top soldiers. Retrieving the eye of Mikhail is now their highest priority. It's a direct order from Field Marshal Miroku. Their mission? Capture the Angel of the Death Gods. After Tato is knocked unconscious, Castor begins a magical process on him, until Frau steps in, objecting. He didn't erase the boy's memory of the Seychelles, because doing so would also erase the memory of Mikaj's final smile. Castor explains that, according to military records, a potential host for the Eye of Mikhail once escaped. Since then, the army has been searching for the missing eye. They gathered children who could serve as vessels, and Tato was likely one of them. The bishops debate whether they can let Tato go now. They knew Mikaj wouldn't survive, but they failed to notice the changes in his body. That's on them. Even so, their role isn't to kill cores, and they fear how Tato might react if he ever learns who they truly are. What's more, if the superiors find out Frau didn't wipe the boy's memory, he'll be removed from the 7 ghosts. And he's the only one who can wield Verloren's scythe, but without his power as a ghost, that's impossible. Worse yet, Tato himself could face punishment if his memories aren't erased. Regardless, the bishops plan to remove the collar and train him to become stronger, if needed. Suddenly, Verloren's scythe slips from Frau's grasp and lashes out at Tato. But the Eye of Mikhail awakens, taking control of the boy's body and shielding him. Blaming the bishops for the attack, the Eye admits that under normal circumstances, it would kill them both, but it won't, because that's not what its master wants. Still, it gives them a taste of its power, reducing the chapel to a scene of utter devastation, a vision of hell itself. Then, just as suddenly, everything returns to normal. It was all an illusion. According to the Eye of Mikhail, ordinary humans would have lost their minds or died of a heart attack under such a vision. But members of the 7 ghosts, like Castor and Frau, are built differently. The Eye demands they remove the collar so it can unleash its full power. Castor warns that doing so means turning the Eye over to the Sclave Bureau. And even though the Eye is immensely powerful, it's helpless against the collar's limiter, which can bind, sedate, or even hurt the one wearing it. Seizing the moment, Frau puts Tato back to sleep to contain the situation. Now that the bishops know Klein holds the Eye of Mikhail, they understand why the army is after him. If fate led him to this sanctuary, he may become a guardian angel destined to protect the world. But if the ancient prophecy is true, he'll turn into a dark angel who destroys everything in his path. Out of nowhere, Tato wakes up, as if nothing had happened, startling the others. Apparently, he has no memory of what occurred while Mikhail was in control. Soon after, Klein crosses the church courtyard, ready to say goodbye. He even thanks Rosette for everything she's done for him. The nuns rush out to bid him farewell, and he takes the chance to explain that he made a promise to his late friend. As he walks away, Tato reflects that he didn't deserve the friend he had, and never got the chance to say he was sorry. Even so, Mikaj stood by him, right until the end. In the middle of this quiet moment, Labrador and Castor stop him. They tell him he's not in the right state to make a decision like this, especially with the army hunting him down. But Tato insists. He made a vow to avenge his friend, even if it costs him his life. That's when Frau appears, questioning whether Tato's really going to throw away the life Mikaj died to protect. Without waiting for an answer, he drags Klein to the place where he fought Mikaj, where traces of Xiphon are still etched into the walls. The final words of his friend remain there. "We'll always be best friends. I'm sorry, Tato. You have to live." By showing him this, Frau proves something. This mission Tato is chasing. It's not about revenge. It's about running from the pain he doesn't want to feel. But Frau begs him, survive this pain, and find redemption by protecting the life Mikaj gave him. Desperate, Tato asks how. But that's a question even Seychelles doesn't have the answer to. It's one he'll have to figure out on his own. The next morning, the Barsberg church bell rang at 4 a.m., as always, marking the start of another day at the sanctuary. Like the nuns, Tato was already scrubbing the vast hallways of the institution, which stretched on endlessly. In addition to cleaning, the boy also helped carry coal between the temple floors. Today, for instance, he had to haul a hefty load all the way up to the 35th floor. After that, he'd finally get a break. As he's been doing lately, Klein uses this free time to reflect and grieve. Mikaj's last words gave his mourning a new weight, and vengeance no longer looks quite the same. Still, when Castor and Frau show up to check on him, the boy admits he's struggling with something. If he can't take revenge, how is staying alive supposed to honor Mikaj? Deep down, Tato feels like he's just wasting time there. Curiously, Castor offers to help with his revenge and asks if he's interested in taking the bishop exam. If he passes, he'll receive a pass that gives him free lodging and teleportation access throughout the Empire, even through military checkpoints. The exam is in 1 month. Frau, confused, asks why Castor's doing this. But before he can protest further, Castor's dolls shut him up. Tato accepts the challenge. Before long, the bishops bury him in a mountain of books to prepare for the 100-question first stage of the exam. In total, it's 77 books and 770 chapters of the Barsberg Bible, all of which Tato has to memorize in just 15 days. Strangely, he already remembers parts of it. When Castor reads a few verses aloud, Klein completes them from memory without missing a beat. The bishops are stunned. Tato explains that the words just flowed into his mind like a lullaby. Even so, it's still a ridiculous amount to study, and the pressure is getting to him. After a while, Tato runs into Frau, who warns him ahead of time. The examiners are a pain in the ass. Tato asks if he's one of them, which offends the bishop. That's when Castor shows up to announce that the second stage is a practical exam involving Xiphon. Holding a coffin in his hands, he explains that in this world, some things can't be protected just by watching over them or praying. To save those wandering in the depths of despair after losing their dreams, bishops must arm themselves and fight. Inside the coffin lies a staff shaped like a cross, adorned with a few extra details. Frau takes the weapon and says the next part of the exam is to defeat a core using that staff. Just like Xiphon, not everyone can wield it. Xiphon is the essence of life itself, and when channeled through this staff, it allows the user to capture and destroy cores. As Tato receives the weapon, he remembers training with Xiphon-based arms before, so he gives it a shot. But when he fails, he starts doubting himself. Can someone like him really become a bishop? Frau explains that normally, people begin as ordinary followers and then become priests. But those who can use the staff, regardless of age, are given a chance to skip straight to bishop status and specialize in fighting the darkness. It won't be easy, of course, but Tato should hold on to that chance and give it everything he's got. Castor adds that unlike official bishops, Tato Klein will travel the world battling the forces of darkness, gaining experience along the way. Thinking about it, Klein notes that the Empire's weapons are mass-produced and easily synced with Xiphon, but this staff feels different, unique somehow. Curious, he asks who made it. Castor says it was crafted by the master artisan who visits the church each year. But Tato points out something odd. Neither of them actually uses a staff to fight cores. That's when Castor casually captures a hidden core lurking in the bushes. Frau just shrugs and says they're exceptions. Finally, Castor pins a badge to Tato's uniform, making him an official exam candidate. From now on, he'll be under constant watch and expected to behave accordingly. Later, back in his workshop, Castor takes the core he caught and seals it inside one of his dolls. Then, he casts a Xiphon spell on it. Meanwhile, Tato is hard at work training with the staff. Frau watches him fail for the umpteenth time. 3 straight hours of trying to channel Xiphon and still nothing. Castor shows up and tells the boy that the core he sealed earlier is now inside that doll, and it would be perfect for training. Frau complains that the thing looks like him, until the doll is activated and starts sprinting around Tato like a maniac. Frau's genuinely concerned the kid won't be able to handle it, but Castor reassures him. The core's power has been sealed. Amid the chaos, Tato has no clue how to even begin fighting this annoying little monster, which circles him at ridiculous speed. Castor pieces out, saying it's time the kid learns to fend for himself, and Frau follows suit. As the bishops walk away, the core flashes a smug little "I've got the upper hand now" grin. Tato tries to stay calm and focus his energy through the staff, but he just can't concentrate. At that moment, a few nuns pass by, carrying food in preparation for a major upcoming festival. The core, ever the opportunist, sets his sights on them. The 3 women bicker about whether the thing is actually Bishop Frau or some random nutcase, right before it attacks. Seeing them in danger, Tato immediately channels his Xiphon and blasts the core with a spell. The attack works, for a moment. The threat to the nuns is gone, but now the core is furious. It breaks the seal, unleashing its full power, and with it, grotesque skeletal wings unfurl from its back. Tato totally loses it. He can't summon Xiphon anymore, and the monster nearly takes him out. That's when Mikaj jumps onto the core's face, blinding it and saving Tato from being flattened. But the moment the creature turns around to strike again, Klein panics and starts screaming for Castor. Suddenly, the roots of a flower burst from the ground, wrapping around Core and slamming him to the floor, bringing the duel to a decisive end. Then, Labrador appears, having lent the boy a hand, and gently tells him to rest. He's earned it. The two sit together to relax, and the bishop offers him a floral tea. Tato is struck by the sweet taste, and the clergyman explains, "It tastes that way for those who are wounded, not on the outside, but deep within." Those words trigger something in Tato. He remembers that Mikaj never once asked him to return to the military to save his family, and guilt creeps in. He realizes he never truly grasped how much pain his friend had been carrying inside. That guilt weighs heavily on Klein. He wants to make things right, but then again, Mikaj had said that vengeance was never the answer, and now Tato feels trapped. Labrador, however, believes Mikaj has already forgiven him. He knew returning Tato to the Empire would be a death sentence. That's why he never gave him up. Still, Tato is lost. How is he supposed to live with all this sorrow and uncertainty about the future, especially now that the only friend he ever had is gone in the worst way possible? But there's another piece to the puzzle. He bears the eye of Mikhail. He's the heir to Rags. Maybe that alone is the spark he needs, the reason to move forward, to honor his friend's memory by revealing his truth, his destiny, and ultimately, his fate. As if on cue, the eye of Mikhail lights up again with a brilliant glow. Castor and Frau appear, announcing that this moment is the true starting point for Tato Klein. Later, the boy wanders the endless halls of the Barsberg church, confused and weighed down, until he catches a glimpse, a silhouette that looks like Mikaj. He rushes after it, but when he finally reaches out, it turns out to be someone else entirely. The man he touches is arrogant, convinced Tato grabbed him out of envy for his unreal good looks. When he spots the examination badge on Tato's robe, he instantly recognizes him as a rival. Meanwhile, in the shadowy slums of some forgotten neighborhood, a man walks alone. As he passes by, a woman sitting by the roadside tells him flatly, "God isn't on your side." Her strange eyes unsettle him. He scoffs, saying he doesn't believe in gods, because if they were real, his life would be better. The woman then asks, "Is there anything you'd like to do before you die?" She offers him a deal: relinquish his worthless soul, and in return, she'll grant him 3 wishes. After that strange encounter, everything changed. The man started living a lavish life. He had a beautiful woman by his side and made loads of money doing dirty work. But one day, his wife threatened to expose his secret unless he gave her half of it. So he silenced her, permanently. He thought his luck would never run out. But then, the core that had brought him happiness appeared in the mirror. His 3 wishes had been fulfilled, and now it was time to pay the price. He argued that only the wish for wealth came true, but the core corrected him. His second wish, for a woman he could love, was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. And his third wish? To be free of her. That too had just been granted. Back at the church steps, Tato Klein reflects that no matter what happens, the sun always rises. It sounds obvious, but he'd never really noticed it before. Right in the middle of that quiet thought, the same smug guy from earlier interrupts. He remarks that every year, around 1,000 people take the test to become bishops. He just didn't realize the church had started accepting scrappy little kids who barely hit puberty. Annoyed, Tito gets in his face, and then notices something. This guy, he looks a lot like Shuri from the military academy. That bastard. So he asks if he knows someone named Shuri from the cowardly Oak family. The blonde doesn't take kindly to the insult. Without answering, he grips Tito's hand in a silent showdown, each trying to out-squeeze the other. That confirms it. He is an Oak. Tito then asks what someone from such a politically entrenched family is doing here. The man says he's looking for someone, but doesn't say who, and walks away. Still haunted by the thought of Mikaj, Tato goes chasing after what he thinks is him again. And once again, he's wrong. He mistakes a random guy, and a friend of that guy shows up, nearly causing a scuffle. But before things escalate, some nuns appear and scold them for fighting in a holy place. The two strangers play it off and leave, until Tato catches sight of the silhouette again and bolts after it. He ends up in a courtyard where several members of the church have gathered to witness Assistant Archbishop Bastian perform an exorcism on a core. The crowd is impressed. He frees the tormented soul without causing the host any pain. Tato watches in awe as the Archbishop wields his staff. The three bishops arrive after the ritual and praise Tato for his curiosity and effort. He asks them how Bastian is able to do that. They explain that Bastian, like Labrador, uses a healing-type Xiphon. That kind of Xiphon can't be used for direct attacks, but it can restrain and purge a core from a person without hurting them. They tell Tato that with enough dedication, anyone can learn techniques outside of their natural affinity. But just being strong with Xiphon doesn't mean you know how to use your staff well. That's why, starting today, Tato will begin special training. Later on, Klein finally catches the guy he's been chasing, once again mistaking him for Mikaj. The man jokes that Tato's trying way too hard to be friends with him. That night, back in the slums, the man who made the deal with the core returns to a den full of criminals, his old crew. But now, he moves like a corpse, possessed. He demands their souls, one by one. The demonic aura radiating from him sends the crooks running in terror. And just then, another man appears, calm, deadly, and slaughters the monster with terrifying precision. Blood splashes across his skin, and without flinching, he licks it clean. At the Barsberg Church, Tato Klein is escorted by the nuns to the dormitory where the exam candidates will prepare for the upcoming test. His assigned room is right next to the library. Conveniently, or not, the two guys who nearly got into a fight with him earlier are staying nearby. As for Klein, he won't be alone either. He's got a roommate, and of course it's none other than the long-haired blonde he can't stand. Athena introduces him as Hakaran Oak from the 1st District. Sometime later, the two are settled in their room, still not exchanging so much as a glance. Out of the blue, Hakaran tells the kid to get ready. It's time to practice with the staff. The Xiphon staff, obviously. Tato, on his end, feels ashamed that he still can't wield it properly. The more he tries to channel his power, the more the staff seems to reject him. He's even burned his hand during training, to the point of bleeding. But as he looks closer, he realizes the blood isn't his. It belongs to all those who fought hard to become bishops. Hakaran eventually drags his unwelcome roommate to a training spot. There, a man is surprised to see unfamiliar faces. He introduces himself as Aldo, the guard. When he asks them to sign in, Hakaran notices the strange bracelet on his wrist and quietly tells Tato that it marks Aldo as a former criminal, someone seeking redemption through work in the church. Still, it doesn't hurt to stay alert. Suddenly, Aldo collapses to the ground in pain. Tato and Hakaran rush to carry him to the infirmary. Soon after, Labrador and Castor hear about what happened to the guard. Concerned, they start watching for any other signs of unusual activity, especially since the flowers are trembling again. Tato and Hakaran hurry back to avoid being late for class. On the way, Hakaran even compliments his roommate's kindness. Once there, the lesson of the day is crossing through a barrier. One student asks to check out his friend's staff, admiring the sleek new model. That's when Tato realizes his staff is the only one that's different from everyone else's. Inside the testing room, several cores swim behind a watery barrier that mimics the room's walls. When Tato touches the surface, a chilling voice demands to know his desire. The nun in charge warns everyone. The cores may be behind the barrier, but they're very real. Hakuren puts on a show, striking down a few cores with his staff, handling it like it's an extension of his arm. Everyone is impressed by his precision. Tato asks if his roommate is more of an offense-type user, to which Hakuren replies that they simply draw from different emotions. That gets Tato thinking, Xiphon really does take shape based on what you're feeling in the moment. That's why Imperial weapons are so deadly, while the churches are meant to heal. Reflecting on that, Tato tries once again to channel his emotions into the staff, and fails miserably. Some of the guys tease him, but Hakuren steps in and explains, the staff only responds when your feelings and its spirit are aligned. Just then, Archbishop Bastian shows up in person to encourage Tato. He tells the boy to focus on his desire to serve God and give it another try. With that, Tato thinks of Mikage, and seeing God as the source of strength, he unleashes a burst of power so strong it blasts through the ceiling, nearly frying an unsuspecting student upstairs, and even breaks the staff. Bastian tells him to calm down, assuring him that Bishop Frau used to break that staff all the time. Hakuren, meanwhile, is secretly jealous of how close Tato seems to be with Frau, the bishop who still holds the highest score ever in the second phase of the exam. Meanwhile, Major Hyuga eagerly awaits Ayanami's next move. The commander calmly informs him that the operation is already underway. Later, after recovering, Aldo is back on duty at the church gates when someone calls for help from outside. He opens the door to investigate, and is immediately attacked by a man who reveals himself to be a core. Back in the training grounds, Tato and Hakuren are kicked out of the exercise because of the staff incident. Hakuren's furious, but at least he's finally curious enough to want to spar directly with Klein, impressed by the power the kid showed earlier.